So the first thing we're going to do is to make our new document. So under File, New. Now Illustrator does handle documents a little bit differently. Usually we've been working on one artboard, which means basically one page. You can have more than one artboard. We're going to need 4 of them. And you can arrange these artboards differently. You can either arrange them in a column, kind of a grid type layout, or just a straight row or a straight column, depending on how you want it to do. In ours, we just want it to be kind of in a grid type format. The spacing we'll keep at 1/4 of an inch. The size of it is going to be tabloid size. What's the size of a tabloid sheet of paper?
12 by 18. 11. No, that's
12 by 18 is a little too big.
9 by.
No.
11 by. No, that's pretty big. When you said it the other day, I said tabloid. And it's
Yeah.
like,
It's 11 by 17.
11 by 17.
11 by 17 is what we're going to do. For Illustrator, you can give it a bleed, but you can't really give it a margin. At least you can't preset a margin. What's the difference between a bleed and a margin?
The margin is where kind of it's where all your text fits into
Okay.
the margin, and then the bleed is where you have a little extra that kind of runs off the page.
Okay, exactly. The bleed is usually outside of the page. It's out on the outside. The margin is on the inside of the page, and your text and images usually stay within those margins. Very, very good. We're not going to worry about bleed. As a matter of fact, I'll just turn it all off. All we really want to work with is just the margin. So when I say OK, you can see here's my setup. 4 pages in a grid type format. Now since I can't type in my margins, I'm going to have to make my margins. And on our instructions I say give me a 1-inch margin on all sides of the paper. To turn on to make your own guidelines, margin guidelines, same as in InDesign. We need to turn on our rulers. I don't see them, so I'm going to go to View, Rulers, Show Rulers. And we'll zoom in. And now that I can see it, I just need to click on the ruler anywhere, drag down to the 1-inch margin. And you can see it goes all the way across for both of the pages, so that's very handy as well. Let's do the same thing from the bottom. Since that's 17 inches, we'll just drag this one down to 16. And then, now if I do it down here, notice there's a little gap. See where it's starting at? My page isn't starting right at 17 inches, it's off by a little bit. Do you remember how to reset your starting point of a ruler? What if I wanted that to be the 0 point?
You go back up to that small box.
Right here? Yep. Click on the small box, and when you drag, it will reposition it. Now it's much easier to drag these margins out. 16 inches. Oops, that one's off by a little bit. Let's do that one again. Same way for my vertical guides. Just click and drag. There's 1 inch. It's 1 inch below. And then we'll reposition the ruler to get this one. All good? Nothing we haven't done before. Okay, so now I've got nice little 1-inch margins on all the different pages. Let's start adding some headline text for what we're going to be working with. And remember the headline, oops, I got one more margin, I'm sorry, 10 inches from the top of each page as well. So we don't just want this, we want, let me redo this, sorry about that. 10 inches from the top, so right there. This top portion, this is where our type, big type is going to be. This bottom portion is where the text information is going to be. And I forgot about adding that one, so let's... Oh, there we go. 10 inches from that top. Okay. Now let's start adding type into it. Same way with InDesign, you can either click and drag and create a type box and type within that box. Now if I was to choose my selection tool and reposition it, of course it's going to resize the box, but everything's going to stay within that type box. I can actually zoom in and keep working with that. That's what I want you to do. In Illustrator, however, you can just click once, and that'll give you a line of type. Notice that there's no text box around this. And if I do choose my selection tool and I try to resize it, it's going to resize the entire text all together. However, I'm going to delete this one. Let's make just one text box. Click and drag it out. And let's paste in that first little bit of text. So here's the information. All the world is God's own field. I'm going to Command C to copy it. Command V to paste it. So I've got it nice and in there. We'll even zoom in so we can see it. So what I want to do is to format this so that it fills up relatively well this entire top text box. You can use whatever font that you want it to be. You can use whatever style. What are some other things that I can change up about this type besides the font? Also, I want to keep the color of it black. So
You could change up how it's positioned on the paper.
okay, so it's alignment. I can make it centered. That's one easy way. It doesn't have to be centered. Now, the example I gave you was centered. You can keep things left and right aligned. What are some other things that come to mind?
And the font could be changed.
The font, so you can use any particular font that you want. Here's the tip about Illustrator. If I was to click, here's of course my font up here. On the drop down, notice that I can't really see what the font looks like. I get the name of it. If I want to see what it looks like, I want to open my character palette. I can click on that. Gives me all the other information, and when I click on this, I can see exactly what it looks like. Oh, let's just choose one. Hey, that one's kind of cool. We'll go with that. Not saying it's the best one, but we'll go with it. So I've got that. I can increase my font size. What are some other things that I could do?
You could like leave say the word God bigger and some of the other letters smaller.
Exactly, yeah. So you can start changing up the size of the font within there. So that's a great way of doing it. All the world is God's own field. What else? What else?
So you're going to keep the color the same.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
What if I wanted to bring the words closer together? What's that called?
change your kerning? No, leading.
Leading, exactly. The lines of the words. That's what I meant to say. Remember, you can find leading and kerning, tracking. All of that is in the characters palette. So click on that. Here is our leading. Of course, if I increase it, it'll give it more. If I decrease it, you can see starts to get closer together. Now, when it gets closer together, of course, it's more packed, it's more dense. That's okay. If I want it, but I've also got all this negative space out here, so I would need to fill up this area as well. What I want you to do is to try to fill up this as much as possible. It'll be okay if you got a little extra areas, but this is way, way too much. Again, you could say, well, let's say I wanted to make God's much larger. I can make it a larger font. Of course, what's happening now?
It's really overlapping.
It's really overlapping. And how would I adjust that? What's
Going back to the leading.
back to the leading? Exactly. Give it a little bit more leading to be a little more appropriate. That looks pretty cool. Other things you can do, let's say I wanted this word to be all caps very quickly. In your characters palette, down here at the bottom, here's all of your, so there's small caps, here's all caps. And so now I can make that much larger. Of course, it's taking up too much space. So there's that way of doing that one. You can keep playing around with that to keep, to see how it's done. Yeah, exactly. It looks very much like a tree one. Tell you what, let's make this all caps. The word God's is 199 points. See how big I can make this one. Close to 200. Let's give it a little bit more leading as well. So you can see how I'm increasing it. Let's make owns a little bit closer to it. Oh, come on. There we go. So, all I'm doing is playing around, but you can see the variety within just that one little bit of text that you're able to do. Same way as when we did it with what was it? The first project that we did with the mine's drawing a blank. The lettering, where you had to curve the lettering, you had to change the style, the placement of it. Just as with this, except you're using straight type. Any questions on doing this one? Top part, so far so good. So you'll do the same thing with each of the pages. On the second page, you'll use that word. On the third page, you'll use "Hither to thy help I come." And the final one, you'll use this one. Next thing you're going to do at the very bottom, we're going to set. So that was the headline on the second page. We're going to set the body text of it. As with the top one, we're going to use our text, our type tool. Click and drag. Here's another thing. Notice that when I got really close to this one and I started to click, it selected this type field. I didn't want to do that. What I want to do is to draw a new one. So I'm going to deselect that. Instead of clicking up here, I'm going to click down here. It's out of the way, and it'll let me select it a little bit better rather than having to accidentally click up there. Inside of this area, we're going to draw a text box margin to margin from lower part, and we're going to open up our text options box, because what I want to do is I want to divide this text into 3 columns. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. I'm going to copy out my text. So Command C, I'm copying this, and I'm going to paste it. Now of course it's got the last font that I used on there, so I'm going to quickly what's the default font? I'll use Helvetica. There we go. Make it really small. Ooh, way too much leading. Auto leading. So what I would like to do is, right now it's in one column of text. I want to divide this up into several different columns, 3 columns of text. You can do column text in Illustrator. So I've got my text box selected. Under type, go down to type options. Area type options, excuse me. And this will bring up this window. If I click the preview, you can see, first of all, I can give it a width and a height. We're not going to change that. Instead, we want to change up the number of columns that's inside of it. Keep rows at 1. We're not going to worry about that. As you can see, now it's in 3 columns, 4 columns, as many columns that you need. You can also set the amount of space that's between the columns. This is the gutter, to 1.88. That's what we want it to look like once it's done. Everything else, we'll keep it exactly the same. We'll say OK. Then you can copy and paste your information in there. Already did it. Let's format it the way I want it to be formatted. I do want it to be myriad. So MYR. That size, let's see, 11-point size. I've still got everything in all caps, so let's turn off all caps. And we're going to keep the color black for now. The final thing, we're going to open up our paragraph palette and do first line indents for everything. So let's zoom in. How do I determine, right now, if you were to look at this, how would you know that a paragraph begins and ends?
Well, except for the space maybe in between.
Exactly. The space is the only thing that you know that there's a break in the paragraph. If you were a graphic designer, however, sometimes you want all of the paragraphs to not have a space. You want everything to be evenly spaced out. So if I was to get rid of these spaces, well, it's very difficult to tell exactly where it's at. So remember, we do have subheads,
Mhm.
and I believe in here the only thing we're going to make these bold. So we're going to change that from Roman to bold. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is by adding an indentation to the first line. And we're only going to do this indentation to every paragraph that's not the first paragraph. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So this first paragraph we're going to skip over. This one is the one that we're going to indent. So I'm going to highlight it. And I say in the instructions to open the paragraph palette. Here's the word paragraph. And this option right here is the first line indent. And so the first paragraph subheads is going to be 20 points. We'll hold down my shift key to go a little faster. See the indentation?
Mhm.
Perfect. Same way for this one. Highlight the paragraph, open the paragraph palette, first line indent. So now when you look at it, you can tell when that second paragraph starts.
Right.
This will especially come in handy once we start adding the leading to it and the image around this. Any questions on this one?
So cool.
Nothing major. I'm trying to keep it really simple. Okay, here comes the fun part. We are going to add an image to this. Let's see. Yeah, add an image, and we're going to wrap the type around the image. Let's see if I got my example opened up. So for this one, you can see how I've got the pear inside of here, and the text is wrapping around the shape of the pear. So in other words, it's not overlapping. To do this, I've got an actual object in front of it. If I didn't have the wrapping, it would look something like this.
Right.
So that's not what we want. We want it to look like that. We want it to show up and show up nicely. So we're going to go back to here. I'm going to go to File and Place, just as in InDesign. And it's on the desktop. Come on. The pear is the one we're working with. Same place. It's going to place it inside of here. Easy question. Why is the pear covering up the text?
Because it's in front.
It's in front. It's on top of it. So how do I get over that? What can I do?
You gotta send it back.
Send it to the back. So the first thing I do, once I place it, I'm going to send it to the back. Object, transform, arrange, send to back. There we go. So we can at least see that when working with this. The next thing we need to do, and this is a little more difficult in Illustrator than it is in InDesign, but we need to draw around this object. We actually need to give it a shape to work with. The easiest tool to use is your pen tool, or you could use the pencil tool, which is a little more freehand. I'm going to use the pen tool. But with this tool, I'm even going to set my fill and stroke so I can see it. Just click and drag around it. This will give you some practice working with that pen.
You can go so fast.
I've done it a lot of times.
Mhm.
Okay. But all I did, it was just a very rough outline. I didn't even worry about the actual shape of it.
Mhm.
For now, just give me an object that goes around that shape.
Mhm.
With the object created, the little outline of it, now I need to turn on text wrap. To do this, I've got it selected. Under Object, very bottom, Text Wrap, we'll choose Make. Now do you see what's happening?
Mhm.
It's spacing out from there. If I wanted to adjust the amount of space, notice that, I'll zoom in, we can see it. That's the amount of space that's offsetting the text. I can go to Object, Text Wrap, and I can have open up the options for it. And I can give it either more or less. So if I preview it, see I can increase the offset. More space, it'll push the characters out a little bit more or less from there. Alright, the last thing I need to do is to just adjust this type so that it fits this entire lower area. See, I'll zoom in. Notice how it's only kind of coming to right here? I want it to flow all three types. So what's the best way of expanding out this text so that it has fills up more room? No, not just the columns. How can I have more room between the lines?
Oh, it's not current, is it current?
Leading, exactly. The leading.
I've got kerning on my mind.
Cool. The more you practice it, we're going to adjust the leading so that all of this fills back up. So I did Command A, selected all of it. Remember, it's under your characters palette. Let's see what happens when I start increasing the leading. All I'm doing is hitting my up arrow. And it's spreading all the way out. Now if I go too far, check out what I got down at the bottom. A little red box. I know I've gone too much, so I need to back it up just a little bit. So that's too far. That looks just good enough. But we're not done yet. If I was to read this, turn off my... The other thing is I need to get rid of my stroke around this one, so I'm going to set that to none too. If I was to read this, does this read very well? It's too broken up. I need to readjust some things so that there's no broken spaces in here. The easiest thing you can do if this happens, if you get little trapped words inside of here, is to adjust your outline, this little line that we have, and move it around so that it pushes those words out of the way. Which tool best selects? The direct selection, the white arrow tool. And it's going to take me a little time. I need to find it. Oop, there it is. But when I do click on it, I can choose the line. All I'm going to do is just move the line so it's bigger, and it'll start pushing those words out of the way. It's kind of just a simple trick. Even that, use to, no, don't want to do that. So that's one way. Maybe I could put a little bit of type around this one. Bring it in, we'll bring in some other words. Another thing you can do is rather than having the apple or the pear right here, if I select, let's see if I can get, I'm going to click and drag over and then deselect this. If I select both the outline and the image and move it over, now you can see it will wrap around both edges that way as well. Pretty cool? All right. One last thing, and this is kind of the nitpicking things. Do you know about widows and orphans?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see any widows or orphans on this particular page?
Journey at the bottom.
Uh-huh.
Scene at the bottom.
At the very end, exactly. This is a good layout that we got right now, but I don't want to have just one word right there. What can I use to get rid of my widows and orphans?
We can pull the space back in a little bit.
More than that.
Move it.
To get rid of them, this is where your kerning and tracking comes in. Okay, so I'm going to select just this paragraph. And go up to the characters palette. This one right here, the tracking. Let's see what happens when I increase it. Check out my last line now. I was able to increase it just enough to push one, sometimes two or three words down to the bottom. That looks much more sharp. Let's do the same thing for the last one. So select it. Under character, we're going to increase the tracking. There we go. Now it took just a few bits of it. Now if you overdo it, I'm going to overdo it.
Get the red box.
You get the red box and it becomes a little too difficult to read. But I had to way overdo it to get it to that. I think about 7 was enough just to give me 1 or 2 words down at the bottom. So what I'm going to be looking for this exercise, first of all, lay out your type, lay out the bottom text, everything, all that would be good. And do wrapping around the image. All you've got to do the wrapping is just draw a box around it, turn it on. The last thing is to edit it so that there's no widows or orphans at the very bottom. Any questions on that?
Not right now.
Okay. I'm going to give you one quick tip on what to do. Once you've got one done, all you've got to do is really just copy it onto the next page. You don't even have to do any more editing or, formatting. So if I know that my text is going to be exactly the same on here,
Mhm.
I'm going to make just a quick copy of it. I've got my text box.
Mhm.
All I have to do now is select my other text
Mhm.
and paste it into here. And then format it correctly from that. Make sense?
Okay.
So you don't have to, in other words, reformat it or redo everything from the beginning. You've got it done once, you can make it fit into the other one. Okay. Any questions on this before I turn it over to you? I meant to keep it very, very simple. Just take it one step at a time. Do your heading. You can do all the headings first, then go back and do all the type, and then all the other stuff as well.